Notre Dame has always had a ton of big quarterback prospects and really good players at the position. In the last decade or so, it's been very interesting for them. They've had some pretty big names such as Deshaun Kaiser, Ian Book, and even a guy like Jack Cohn who put up big numbers, but for the most part, they've been missing a quarterback who has everything. A guy who was athletic enough, had a strong arm, could scramble, had good mental intangibles, and had NFL upside. I'd say Deshaun Kaiser was the closest they had to that, but back in the mid-2010s, there was a player that many thought could do just that. He was one of the best running quarterbacks in the country, had one of the strongest arms in the country, was a stand-up dude off the field, and looked like if he could put everything together, could be the next big thing. That guy was a player by the name of Brandon Wimbush. He was a top 50 recruit in his class, was seen as the next great Notre Dame quarterback, and unfortunately, he never ended up working out in South Bend, but has been extremely successful and had a very interesting college career. Today, we're going to take a look at the rise and fall of Brandon Wimbush. We're going to go through how he became a top 50 recruit, his time at Notre Dame, and where he ended up after that. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about what happened to Brandon Wimbush. But in order to understand how Wimbush got to this point, we first need to go back in time all the way to 2009. Wimbush was in his 6th grade history class and was learning about the Electoral College, and they had a class election. Wimbush actually ended up being sworn into office and was made the president of the class. He may not have been the most vocal middle schooler, but his mother said, quote, "He's one of those kids who's done the right thing since day one, and he didn't cry much, and he was a perfect baby, and it has been good since the beginning." She remembers all the parent-teacher conferences going the exact same way, and the common comment was that Brandon was always trying to help other students become better, and that he was always a leader and that kids respected him. Wimbush had the makings of the next big thing. You don't think of New Jersey as a hotbed for quarterback talent, but Wimbush had the physical and mental tools to become a big-time recruit, and that is exactly what he did. While he was at the famous St. Peter's Prep School, he played alongside future college football superstar Minkah Fitzpatrick and a few other talented players as well. His head coach always knew that Wimbush was going to be a big deal, and some thought that he should have started as a sophomore instead of a senior starter, but he apparently wasn't ready. He said, quote, "It would have been easy to stick Brandon in there and just say whatever happens, happens, but he wasn't ready, and I didn't want that to affect his junior and senior year." Okay, so as a junior, Wimbush completed 60% of his passes for 1,472 yards and 14 touchdowns, with 578 yards and 7 scores on the ground. Rutgers, Miami, and Ohio State were the first schools that offered Brandon, but he was seemingly waiting on one school, Penn State, where his mom went. Some thought that Brandon would be Ohio State bound, but eventually he would choose a different school, and the Buckeyes had to go for Torrance Gibson instead, which is another great story. Wimbush decided to commit to Penn State, and despite being committed to the Nittany Lions, he was still entertaining other programs and other schools, and was later projected to flip. Wimbush eventually visited Notre Dame as he spent time with Matt LaFleur, watched them beat Stanford, and sat in on their meetings, plus had a spiritual visit to the grotto. He said, quote, "It was awesome and I really enjoyed it." Notre Dame's running backs coach Tony Alford was leading the way, and eventually Wimbush would flip to Notre Dame and not go to Penn State. Notre Dame had long been trying to fill that spot, as many thought that Blake Barnett was going to go there, but he instead ended up going to Alabama. His mother was a Penn State alum and said, quote, "I think somewhere in his mind, he thinks Notre Dame is better for the long run in his future." As a senior, he had a crazy year, as he almost broke the national season record for completion percentage, as he completed 72.3% of his passes for 3,187 yards, 37 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions. In Wimbush's last game, they would play against Paramus Catholic, who had Rashawn Gary on the opposing team. Wimbush had gone the entire 2014 season without getting sacked, but that was until Rashawn Gary came in. The team ended up having 6 total sacks, and Gary had 2 of them. Wimbush was averaging nearly 400 yards per game, but his best moment came in the midseason when they were up 21-0. After a couple of series, he went off the field and told his head coach that he had a suggestion for him. He said he wanted to change the game plan to get the ball to a backup receiver, and Coach Hansen said, quote, "Why?" And then Wimbush said, "Because he works hard too, and I want to get him involved in the offense." And then the coach said, "All right, we'll get it done." As a senior, Brandon would help his school win their first state title since 2005, and he also received many awards, including the Gatorade Player of the Year, New Jersey's Offensive Player of the Year, and was an Under Armour All-American. He had a strong arm and had shown the ability to be a quality passer, but his true standout ability was his knack for tucking and running the ball. According to 24/7 Sports, Wimbush was a 4-star recruit, the number 3 dual-threat quarterback, and the 43rd overall player in the class of 2015. So, how would he end up doing in South Bend? Well, let's take a look. So when Wimbush arrived in South Bend, Indiana, he was compared to Everett Golson, except there were a couple of notable differences. He was bigger than Everett was and was also not quite as polished as a passer, but both were confident, strong-arm pass-first quarterbacks who were able to make things happen with their feet when the play would break down. Wimbush would end up being the backup to both Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser at first, and in 2015 he actually had to appear against both Pitt and UMass. He scored his first career touchdown on the ground against the Minutemen, and then he would end up redshirting in 2016, to make up for having to burn it in 2015. In 2016, Notre Dame had their first losing season since 2007, and they'd be losing both Kaiser and Malik Zaire, so now all of a sudden, Brandon Wimbush was going to be the guy as a redshirt sophomore. To start out in 2017, Wimbush would make his first career start against Temple, and in that game, he'd have 3 total touchdowns. Sadly, in week 2, he ended up being humbled, as he did have a touchdown in their loss number 15 Georgia, but they would ultimately lose by 1 point against the Bulldog. From there, it went back and forth. He had 207 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns in a win over Boston College, but many were skeptical of him. After that Boston College game, many were calling for Wimbush to actually be benched because of his inability to be a passer. While he had a school record 207 yards for a quarterback, he only completed 11 of 24 passes for 96 yards and completed less than 50% of those passes. Notre Dame's passing efficiency was near the bottom of the FBS after 3 games, and many thought that Ian Book could do a better job. Ultimately, Wimbush would get plenty of time the rest of the year, as he would score a rushing touchdown in 10 of their 12 games, had 3 passing touchdowns in a win over Miami of Ohio, helped them beat 2 top 15 teams in USC and NC State, and then watched as their season would fall apart as he played terrible in a game against number 7 Miami, and they ultimately lost by 18 on the road against Stanford. Notre Dame would end up going 9-3 in 2017, and they'd get a chance to play in the Citrus Bowl, where they ended up beating number 17 LSU. In total, Wimbush passed for 1,900 yards with 16 touchdowns and 6 picks, but had 800 yards rushing with 14 scores there. Many thought he was a great leader and a good runner, but were worried about his ability to be a passer. At times it looked completely disastrous, and many were wondering if Ian Book could end up being better. Except in the offseason going into 2018, Brian Kelly said, quote, "When he's confident, there's nobody that'll stop this offense because everybody believes in Brandon Wimbush." In week 1, they'd end up playing against number 14 Michigan, and Wimbush would end up throwing for 1 touchdown and an interception. In week 2 against Ball State, he actually ended up having a career-high 297 passing yards, but had 3 interceptions and an 8-point victory over the Cardinals. This was a really bad moment. Many thought that the coaching staff was purposely making Wimbush pass a ton to try to regain that confidence, but instead, he ended up completing 55% of his passes and had 3 interceptions. This would only make Wimbush look worse, and now there was pressure on him to perform at an all-time level. He didn't do much better against Vanderbilt, and then eventually Ian Book would take over. Wimbush's last good moment at Notre Dame came against Florida State in November, as in that game he threw for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. In total, Book took over the team, but Wimbush finished with 719 yards with 4 touchdowns and 6 picks, and 1 more score on the ground. There was no hard feelings though, as Wimbush and Ian Book were apparently best friends. Before the calendar could turn another year, Notre Dame center Sam Mustipher said, quote, "In the only fashion that Brandon Wimbush could, news would break that he's going to be moving on, and people only love him more. I make fun of him for it." He was apparently a fan favorite and a team favorite at Notre Dame, and when he decided to enter the transfer portal, many were supportive. Eventually, he would transfer to UCF, and Wimbush would make his first career start against Florida A&M. Many were worried about Mackenzie Milton, who had horribly torn his ACL at the end of last year, and for now it looked like Wimbush would be the guy, but he would have to fend off a freshman by the name of Dylan Gabriel. Eventually, Gabriel would take over, and Wimbush was now done and beaten out for a second time. In total, Wimbush played in 5 games, throwing for 167 yards with 2 touchdowns without an interception. He threw a total of 24 passes and ran the ball 11 times. When asked, he was very vague about what went wrong, but he said it was the why on his shoulders. He said it was all issues away from football, and he wanted to give his time and attention to other things. He started 1 game at UCF, and in total in college, he went 14-3 as a starter. In 2020, Wimbush was still trying to make it to the league though, as he said, quote, "I want to be a guy who can do a lot of things for an organization, and I think there's value in that. So at the pro day, I'll throw the ball, but I'll also be catching, running, and doing whatever the scouts want me to do." He said he already knows what life is going to be like when football ends, and realizes that his football career could end quickly. He never ended up making it off to the NFL, and he always had a plan to get involved with venture capital or something in the business world, as he did graduate from Notre Dame's prestigious business school. Eventually, he would team up with a guy he met back in recruiting, Blake Barnett. As of today, they had met 10 years ago at a recruiting camp in Baltimore, and that was the first time the two quarterbacks would cross paths, but then they become lifetime connections, and neither of their college careers went according to plan. Eventually, Wimbush and Barnett took advantage of the moment that college athletes could monetize their brands, as NIL became a thing just about 3 years ago. Wimbush became the chief athletic officer and co-founder of Mogul, a platform designed to connect college athletes with businesses. Barnett was one of his clients and earliest adopters. In its most direct sense, the company was created to help college athletes get paid. Wimbush said, quote, "There were a lot of opportunities that we weren't able to take advantage of and things that were put in front of our face when I was at Notre Dame. I think it made me want to be a part of this to fully empower the college athlete." So yeah, Wimbush's career never really worked out, and while he was supposed to be the next great thing at Notre Dame, in my opinion he wasn't exactly a bust either. He was a fan favorite, got an opportunity to start a year and a half for the Fighting Irish, and made a very successful business out of his name. While he never ended up making the NFL or breaking the Notre Dame stat records, Wimbush was a quality guy, a seemingly really quality person, and he had his moments. Man, his arm and legs were incredible while he was there, and still sometimes Notre Dame fans think of him as a what if. But what do you guys think? If you're a Notre Dame fan, what went wrong for Brandon Wimbush and why did he not put it all together? Also, who's another big time player or quarterback who had a lot of potential who also flamed out? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you didn't support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out more of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.